All right, everyone, I think we're ready to start. So thank you everyone for joining Data Theorem's webinar series. Today's topic is what's missing in your API security program, which will be presented by Josiah. But before we begin, I just want to let everyone know we will be doing a Q&A towards the end of the presentation. So if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A panel within the WebEx webinar, and we'll be able to get to those at the end. And we will also be recording this, so we'll make it available to you after the fact. But with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Josiah to present. Josiah?
All right. Thanks for that intro there, Richard. I just want to thank everyone again for taking the time to meet with us today. And so, as you guys know, we'll be going over what's missing in your API security program, what we're seeing out there in the wild, and what you can do to better improve your API security program if you don't already have these already implemented. So for the agenda, the first things that we'll be going over is like I was saying, is the three necessary functions we've been seeing for your API security program, how to implement these functions, and then putting these all together as well. So what might be missing in your API security program? So there's three things that we're going to be pointing out here. And the first is building out your single source of truth. And so what this is going to be is your inventory. And so what this process is the discovery and inventory process. And what we want to know here is a known and unknown. And this is we're going to be going over shadow as well as zombie APIs. The next thing that we're going to be going over is the triaging top issue. So we're going to learn how we should be testing these different security or this inventory that we just built out, as well as being able to triage the most important issues that we're finding from there. Then lastly is going to be measuring for success. So being able to build a security program over time and being able to pivot on based on attacks we're seeing out there in the wild and how your applications and your APIs are behaving as well. And so we're going to be letting you know how to implement these into your program. And the first thing that we're going to be going over is building out your single source of truth. So as I was saying earlier, this is going to be an API inventory, and you want to make sure this is always dynamically updating with all your known and your unknown, which is your shadow and your zombie APIs. And the first thing that we're going to be going over is our known APIs. And so our known APIs are usually going through let's say, API gateway. We already have documentation already set up for them. There's things like Swagger specs, Open API, Postman recordings, things that we already have that we can automate different test flows and know where these APIs are reaching back to in terms of what cloud resources as well. So I already have a security strategy in place for this, not too much to worry about. What we do want to start worrying about is what we don't know about within our own environment. And so what we don't know about are these shadow APIs. And so shadow APIs aren't formally documented, and we don't know what information they're carrying, and we don't know where they're linking back to in terms of, let's say you might think you're a GCP shop, but some of these shadow APIs are linking back to an AWS shop. And I can show you a quick example of this about how common this is and how often we see this throughout environments that we're having today. And so you want to make sure that you have a security program that can identify these shadow APIs, and so you know about them within your environment. And so a real world example of this is we're working with a note-taking company, and they thought they were completely a GCP shop. And we're working with them for specifically their mobile applications. And their CISO, they understood that their APIs are also a part of that mobile application attack surface. And so he wanted to start mapping out all the APIs under his mobile application. And so he thought he was completely GCP shop. And what we figured out is, hey, looks like we found about 20 to 30 to 40 about API calls reaching back to a GCP shop. But what he didn't know about were 4 API calls linking back to an AWS environment that he didn't know existed within his API inventory, and that he didn't have security strategy or standards set in place for as well. And so I think you can kind of imagine the look on his face. It was a pretty gut-wrenching moment because you don't know about these APIs linking back to an AWS environment you didn't know existed in your environment as well. And so once we had security standards in place for this AWS environment, I was asking him a bit more about, hey, how did you discover this? How common is this? And I don't want you to think that this can happen within your own environment because it takes something as simple as a credit card to start spinning up a new environment, like an AWS environment, spinning out new features and functionalities. And so we want to make sure that we're always keeping pace with our developers, especially if they're trying to push out these new features, and want to make sure we're keeping track of all the new environments that they're spinning up as there as well. So the next thing that we're going to be going over are zombie APIs. And so zombie APIs are the APIs that are banned or forgotten or have been outdated or unpatched as well, something that we don't have our regular security standards set in place for just because they've been unpatched and they're wasting resources in the background. And so to try to explain zombie APIs, I can try to give an example because you want to make sure that you have someone like Bella Ramsey or Pedro Pascal hunting down these zombie APIs within your own environment as well. And so a real world example of this is, let's say you have version 1 of your application. And with version 1 of your application comes with version 1 of your APIs. And so your application starts to mature, you come out with version 2 and version 2 of those APIs. And as your application starts to mature and mature and mature, you're now at version 9 of your application with version 9 of your APIs. Now, as you're transitioning from version 1 of your application to version 2 of your application, you're going to want to keep some of those version 1 of those APIs to make sure you have some of the same functionality, just to make sure you're not breaking version 2 of your application. But by the time you're at version 9, these APIs that you have over in version 1 and version 2 of your application, they're not necessarily even going to be used anymore. And so this is what we call zombie APIs. And with zombie APIs, the reason that why they're so important, why they create such a big security threat is because these APIs can also be linking back to cloud resources that you might have forgotten about before. Let's say before you thought you were completely GCP shop, you transitioned over to AWS, you still have some of these V1 or V2 APIs that are linking back to a GCP environment. So that creates another security threat in that way here. So that's another reason why you want to start hunting down these zombie APIs. Want to make sure you have someone like Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey hunting down these zombie APIs within your environment so that you can then close them out as well. And so just to try and bring this full circle here, you want to make sure that you have a dynamically updating API inventory with all the known, identifying all the shadow APIs, and making sure you're hunting down all those zombie APIs there as well. Can save a ton of money, as well as making sure you're not putting your business or your customers' data at risk. So want to make sure you're always dynamically updating your API inventory. So triaging top issues. So triaging the top issues, it's not enough to just do the OWASP top 10 or anything MITRE or NIST or anything like that, because everyone's doing that already. What we want to do to take this a step further is being able to automate a lot of these multi-step, these more complicated security testing best practices that I'm showing here on the left. And what this can do for you is not only save you money, but also save you time and letting your pen testers focus on more complicated attacks. So just going down the list about what different security attacks that we want to be running against your environment, right, is the first is going to be anything that's going to be a copycat hack. So these are things that have made huge headlines, things like the Capital One breach with Paige Thompson and her SSRF attack, where she used a API vulnerability and an out-of-date metadata service on their backend in tandem together to extract over 10 million records of PFI data. We know that a lot of these malicious actors out there today are definitely going to be copying any hacks that were especially successful, and you can definitely bet that they're going to be trying that against your own environment as well. So another attack is going to be a over provisioning attack. We saw an example of this with USPS just a couple years ago, where malicious actors were actually able to gain access to other users' accounts, intercept some of their packages, and redirect some of their packages as well. So definitely want to make sure we're not leaking any of our customer data, especially the location data, and even being able to manipulate some of their orders from their own account. And so some other attacks that we also want to start automating, maybe using postman recordings or anything like that, is anything requiring authentication. So things like testing for authentication with what happened with T-Mobile just a couple months ago. Want to make sure that if an API required authentication and then it is disabled, we want to make sure that we're being able to be notified when that happens and what data we might be leaking from that as well. So that would have helped out T-Mobile just a couple months ago. And so things like broken object level authorization, as well as perfect escalation, these more complicated attacks, we know that these can be a little bit difficult to set up, but it's not impossible, and it'll elevate your security program if you can start doing these things throughout your environment today as well. The next is, yeah, we just tested our whole entire inventory of our APIs. Now, what makes an important API? Which of these vulnerabilities should we start closing out first? And so the first thing that we want to take note of any specific APIs is this API internet accessible? We know that malicious actors are obviously going to be going after APIs that are internet accessible. I don't think they'll have anything, they won't have access to anything internally, hopefully. So internet accessible is going to be the first thing that we're going to be looking at. Next thing that we're going to be looking at is what information does this API hold? So does it contain any PFI, PHI, PI data, anything that's going to have any regulatory compliance fines on our business? It's going to make us look bad if we start leaking any personal data like PFI, PHI, PI data. We want to make sure that we understand what data this API holds first, and PFI, anything related to compliance, is definitely going to be a driver. Next is, does this API require authentication? We understand that this API is internet accessible, has sensitive information, so does it require authentication? And if it doesn't, it probably should. And so that's something that we want to take a look at next. Right after that is going to be utilization. We understand the API is internet accessible, has sensitive information. It requires authentication. Now we want to make sure, how often is this API being used? Because if it's an open API and it's being used way more often than for more of our customers, rather than something that's only being called 2 or 3 times, that's something we also want to take in consideration here too, and making sure we're taking that into consideration when we're triaging our APIs. Then lastly is, how is it performing against our API security policies? And so this is going to be including not only the OWASP top 10, but those different strategies I was speaking about earlier about the copycat hacks, over provisioning, broken object level authorization, these different attacks that we're running against our environment, just so that we know if we're taking all these different strategies, we know that we're protected from them as well. And so this is how we like to triage your most important APIs. Now, next and lastly is going to be how to succeed in measuring for success. And so the challenge with measuring for success is your APIs are constantly growing. This is going to be your fastest growing attack surface, especially if you're a SaaS-based company, or if your business operates around any software. Your APIs, you can definitely bet, are going to be growing at an exponential rate. And so being able to keep track of this is also going to be um, can be hindering your success, or something you want to make sure that you can implement into your program. What we also want to understand is how our application is behaving out in the wild. So, what malicious actors are trying to do against our application, where attacks are coming from, what a type of attacks. And big question is, how can we figure all this out? There's a ton of information to take in, and a lot to try and keep track of as well. And so, a couple KPIs that we recommend on making sure that you can track within your own API program are going to be listed here. And so the first one is going to be most targeted APIs. And so your most targeted APIs are going to be what malicious actors are coming after. And so once you start understanding your most targeted APIs, you want to understand what information is behind those APIs, what are they trying to get after, and so you can start creating a security strategy around this and really hardening this part of your application that's reaching back and utilizing these APIs as well. Next is going to be top attack types. And so you're seeing all these targets, or you're seeing all these attacks against your APIs. Now you want to start creating a security strategy and strategizing around the most popular attacks against your API. So things, let's say, like bot detection, or if someone's trying to use an SSRF attack, or let's say a broken object level attack against your APIs. You want to make sure you can create a customized security strategy about how your API is behaving out there in the wild, and adjusting and pivoting to whatever attacks you're seeing out there, so you can protect against them as well. And then lastly is going to be a list of successful attacks. You're seeing all these different attack types. Now you want to start triaging this down even deeper, filtering it even more, and creating a list of the successful attacks against your environment. You know that these are going to be the most important and what you want to really want to start focusing on and helping to harden your API attack surface, your API security strategy there as well. So making sure you have a list of successful attacks so you can better protect against those as well. The next is going to be attack location. So if you don't want your application bouncing around to maybe any specific countries, you want to make sure you can track this as well so you can then prevent your APIs from bouncing those to those specific countries. We know that there can be some regulatory fines, or if there's just different laws that you don't want your application touching that you're not accommodating for. Just some different things that we like to think about when we're creating our API strategy. Next is also going to be attack time. So let's say that you think or you know that your application is being attacked during specific types of the day. And so that's when you want to start really maybe slowing down your testing or amping up your testing, making sure that you can really understand where your attacker's mindset is and what they're trying to do at different parts of the day. Then lastly is going to be APIs with the most traffic. And this is different from your most targeted APIs. Your APIs with the most traffic, for example, is going to be anything with like your open API that most of your customers are going to be using. If a lot of your customers, a lot of your users are going to be using these APIs, even if they don't have sensitive information, we want to make sure that we're attacking these same APIs so we know, hey, we can protect against any of these type of attacks and there's no sensitive data being leaked from these specific APIs that are being utilized the most. So just to bring this full circle, this is something that we all want to start thinking about, especially when we're starting to create a API security strategy and making sure we can customize this to our own environment. So putting this all together, what does a comprehensive API security program look like? And so what we've basically been going over the whole time are these three pillars here: discovery and inventory, security testing, as well as defensive security. And so with discovery and inventory, you want to be able to know your environment, the known and unknown, including the shadow APIs and those zombie APIs, being able to reverse engineer all your applications so you know all the API endpoints in your environment. Next is being proactive, and so being able to attack your environment the same way a malicious actor would, so you know that you're then protected from it as well, and making sure you're taking a bunch of different approaches to attacking your environment so that you know you're protected. And then lastly is defensive security, so being able to see all this real-time telemetry about where attacks are coming from, what types of attacks, the successful attacks, and making sure you can create a security strategy around this because this is going to be customized about how your APIs are reacting out there in the wild. And if you're interested in actually seeing how we're actually helping customers out there complete all this in terms of these three pillars: inventory, security testing, as well as defensive security. Data Theorem does do all of these. We've been helping a ton of our customers complete and even improve upon their API security programs today. So really quickly want to show you the different types of customers that we're working and the different type of environments that we're working with as well. And so anything from startup all the way to enterprise API environments we do work with as well. Going back to this. And so if you were actually interested in maybe learning a bit more and doing a bit more on that, you can reach us over at my contact here. But that's it for this webinar here. I know that we'll be taking questions. Looks like we had a couple coming through the chat, and so
We did.
I'll let Rich take over from here.
Yeah. So we got two questions during the presentation, Josiah. So the first one, and we'll start here, is how long does it take to build an API security program?
Yeah, so initially it doesn't take long at all to build an API security program. If you wanted to work with Data Theorem, we can actually onboard your environment into our portal over here and actually start seeing some results within the week. So if you really wanted to get started and have no idea where to get started, I think Data Theorem would definitely be a good place to start building out your API security program. You can see how your APIs are behaving out there in the wild, and we can even help you build out a customized security strategy behind that. But short answer, shouldn't take any time at all.
And then, as a second question, what is the average number of APIs per application that Data Theorem sees?
Gotcha. So this is an interesting question because your API is going to be constantly growing. But to give you a short answer to this, per application, where I think we're seeing about 26 to 50 APIs per application. But I want you to keep this in mind that your APIs are going to be constantly growing as your applications are maturing. And so I could guess that let's say this time next year, that number could be anywhere from 50 to 100. You never know. Depends on your environment, depends on your company. Depends on how often your application is also maturing, but 26 to 50 is what we're seeing right now. But I do expect that average number to keep growing as well.
Awesome. And then, if you don't mind, Josiah, sharing just again how people can get in contact with us if they have any additional questions.
Yeah, definitely. So you can get in contact with me at ja@datatheorem.io, or you can reach out to knowledge@datatheorem.io, or something that's even more direct. We do have some free trial signups on our website that can be pretty easily accessed there as well. But yeah, you can definitely reach out to us here, and we'd be happy to help you out.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining our presentation today. Thank you, Josiah, for presenting today. And with that, we'll kind of wrap things up, and we'll make sure that we provide the recording as available as we saw it today for you to watch at a later time. Thank you again, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.